Welcome, Anne. Very nice of you to join us.
Hello.
Yes, and I must say, Anne is our hero, or my hero, because I only invited her yesterday and she was still willing to give us a presentation. So I'm very interested and very happy that you are here. I am going to share the screen for the presentation Anne is going to give us. So, and then let me see. So, do you see Culture Seeds big? Okay. Anne is a coordinator at Culture Seeds, and she will elaborate a little bit more about the program, but also about the data aspect in Culture Seeds. And because you only have half an hour, I will just give the floor to you. And shout if I have to put on another slide.
Will do. Yeah, so I've pulled this together fairly quickly, but I hope it's useful. So yeah, I work at the Greater London Authority in the Culture and Creative Industries unit, and I'm the Culture Seeds coordinator. So it was my job to oversee the programme. If you go to the next slide.
Sorry. I didn't do anything and then it was too fast. Just sorry, one moment. So, this the right one? I think.
Yeah, that's it. So Culture Seeds was a funding programme. We had £1 million to distribute over 2 years, and they were small grants of £1,000 to £5,000, with the aim of supporting community-led arts, culture and heritage projects. And the real key for us in that is the community-led part of it. The people we were trying to reach was either individuals who were representing their community or small organisations who don't necessarily have a track record of getting funding for culture projects, who may not even think that what they're doing is a culture project, sort of sewing lessons for older people or something like that. And so what we aimed to do was attract small organisations. So we said that larger organisations couldn't apply. And we also did a sort of programme of roadshows where we could go out and talk to people to kind of give them advice about how to apply where they haven't had much experience of fundraising. And then we also set up this idea of a Culture Seeds community, which was a network of funded organisations and individuals who we brought together sort of 2 or 3 times a year, sort of with the hook of doing some kind of development or educational work with them, but actually mainly so that we could meet them and they could meet us and they could meet each other, and we could hear more about the projects they were running. Next slide. Yeah. So we had to collect data for a number of purposes for Culture Seeds. First of all, sort of as part of the GLA's monitoring for our key performance indicators that fed into the overall sort of performance of how the Culture and Creative Industries unit was delivering. It also gave us sort of intelligence on the programme as we were running it. So for instance, a few months into the programme, we could see we weren't getting many applications from West London. So we could tweak our marketing so that we sort of focused on organisations based in West London. Or there was a time when we sort of noticed we weren't getting very many applications from LGBTQ+ projects. And so we sort of had to think about, well, what networks can we tap into to publicise the programme? So the data was really useful in that respect. We also wanted the data for our own evaluation and impact. And also to respond to Mayor's questions. The Mayor's questions is sort of a monthly 3-hour session where the Mayor answers questions from the London Assembly on his programmes. So it might be questions that say, well, what is the Mayor doing for young people? So we need to be able to sort of answer those questions from a culture team perspective. And then finally, what we wanted to be able to do was, because Culture Seeds was a fairly new way of working for the GLA, is we wanted to be able to advocate for this model of small grants to small organisations and the difference that they can make. Next slide. So part of the challenge for data was balancing a really light touch approach to grant making that made applying for funding simple for organisations and individuals that don't have a lot of experience of fundraising. And that sort of follows right through from the application stage to the reporting stage, that, you know, applicants haven't suddenly got a whole lot more experience because we've awarded them a grant. So we needed to sort of go quite gently. But we also needed to balance that with being able to report as a public sector body on how we're spending our funding. And so within that, we also needed to consider proportionality, that actually there's a limit to how much information you can ask for people for a £5,000 grant, as opposed to much larger grants. And so we wanted to think about how we as an organisation can lighten that reporting load for grantees, and what information do we already hold that can give a bit more of a picture of the kind of projects that we're funding. So the next slide. So we collected data in a number of ways, and kind of gradually at different stages through the life of the grant, thought about how we can build on the data that we've already got, and ask for new bits of information as we go along. So as I said, the application form, we wanted to keep fairly light touch and not overload with a lot of information requests. So we asked for, within that, obviously, you know, details about the project, but particularly we asked for numbers around participants, volunteers, and, you know, number of workshops and things like that. We don't hold people to those numbers. It's more that sort of in the early days of the project, we needed to be able to report on something until the final report started coming in and we knew what the projects had actually achieved. Also, we can tell a lot of information from a postcode. We're lucky to have the GLA intelligence team who can analyse a lot of different data sets, where a postcode can give us a lot of information. And then we added more data at the assessment and decision stage of the project. So we would enter into a spreadsheet the type of project, the beneficiaries. So, you know, is this project reaching people from low-income households? Is it reaching young people? And that helps us with our overall reporting, but it also helped us with those, particularly with those mayor's questions. You know, what is the mayor doing to help disabled people in Haringey? Well, we could filter that out on the basis of this information that we added at the assessment stage. And then we ask for a final report from our grantees that they need to fill out to get the final 10% of their grant payment. And we worked with the GLA intelligence team and an external evaluator to develop questions that help us to measure some of the social impacts of projects, as well as all those numbers. So things like, following your project, how connected do you feel to your community? We also ask questions around, you know, did this project help you to make new partnerships? We also did some participant questionnaires, which were designed, rather than the people that were running the project, were designed to be asked to the people that were involved in the project. And these sort of asked questions that replicated some of the information from the Department for Culture and Media and Sports' Taking Part survey, so that we could kind of benchmark information there. And then sort of on the more qualitative side, our evaluator did a lot of face-to-face interviews with people that were running the projects to kind of, and at various stages, so while they were running the project, but then also afterwards, so that we could sort of get a sense of what their project had achieved. And then informally, the Culture Seeds community events were a way of us being able to have those informal conversations with the people that were running projects, so that we could hear about some of the challenges that they faced. We could hear about some of the work that they do on a day-to-day basis, which really helps us to answer, to give us an overall picture of kind of the projects, but it also gives us more information of the challenges facing smaller organisations. And it helped us to make connections, more personal connections with the grant holders, and become advocates for their projects, because we're quite well connected at the GLA, and are there any avenues that we can direct people down? So yeah, the numbers for Culture Seeds, you know, we received requests for over £6 million for a budget of £1 million, and awarded £1 million, just over £1 million to 244 projects. This figure in bold is all drawn from the postcode analysis that we did ourselves. So we know we have a measure, I don't know if it's just an English thing, of the multiple indices of deprivation, which take a number of measures that tell you sort of how deprived or well off an area is. And so we know from that information that most of our projects took place in the most deprived areas in London. And then also, as part of our focus was on reaching individuals, smaller, more informally constituted organisations, it was useful for us to know that almost 2/3 of our funding went to individuals, unconstituted or voluntary community groups. Next slide, sorry. And then from the final reports, we know that 87,000 Londoners were involved in the projects as participants or audiences, and collectively the projects offered 1,300 volunteering opportunities. Over 3,400 workshops or sessions took place. We reached people that were from Black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds, particularly as grant holders, rather than just as participants or beneficiaries. And then again, from the final reports, we know that a lot of our projects took place in sort of non-traditional spaces for arts, in community centres and health settings and religious buildings, which, as part of our overall strategy for culture, which is really about sort of a city of culture and culture happening everywhere, this is quite a useful bit of information for us to have. So then some of the lessons learned, it was really great to involve our external evaluator and the GLA intelligence team in the designing of the programme from the outset. It meant that we could, again, benchmark information and make sure we're asking the right questions so that we can, you know, look at similar data sets across the GLA. I think there was we sort of recognised the importance of offering face-to-face opportunities between the grant maker and grantee. I think you often find, or certainly back when I was applying for funding and then filling out final reports, that the final reporting is sort of just seen as a task to finish and move on from. Whereas actually being able to have those conversations, you can get more of a sense of what happened with the project and where organisations want to go in the future. I think one of the challenges was around those participant questionnaires that we developed. It wasn't it was very dependent on the grant holder completing those surveys with their participants. So some people did it, some people didn't. So the reports that we have got are from a handful of projects and are not necessarily representative of the programme as a whole. And I think also we need to recognise that there are some participants that a written feedback form is just never going to be the best way of collecting their views, particularly if it's English as a second language or disabled participants, young people. So I think they were useful, but had their limits. And then I think one of the main questions for us is, what do we do with all this qualitative data that we've got? We've got interviews, we've got conversations, we've got all sorts of information that it's very difficult to kind of put into a final evaluation report. You know, we can do some case studies, but they tend to become a little bit wordy. They make an evaluation report quite long. So who is actually going to read and engage with that? I think also the nature of collecting that qualitative data in an informal way is that so much of it is in my head rather than is sort of, you know, corporately available as information. And so we're still working on what to do with all of that. It was one of the things that we were about to start looking at when COVID hit, and then everybody sort of ended up working on different priorities. And so it's something to come back to and to think about how we use those case studies to talk about culture seeds and the projects. And then the final slide, that's just an example of some of the qualitative information that we got that is really useful, but incredibly difficult to kind of measure or you know, put into a nice little report other than as lovely quotes like this. And that's it really on the presentation.
Thank you, Anne. Let me see how I can stop sharing my screen. Stop share. There you are. Thank you so much, Anne. It was very, very interesting. And again, thanks for giving such a lovely and interesting presentation on such short time short notice, I must say. Sorry. We have until 1, so there is some room for questions. I heard the chat. Maybe there's a question in the chat. No, it's not in our chat. So are there any questions? Yeah, Edith.
Can I thank you very much, Anne, because it's the second time I hear your presentation, but with a different focus, and it's completely different. So thank you very much. It was really, really, really interesting. I want to share a thing that I don't know if it's somebody with us from Dublin. No, isn't it?
No. No.
Because Tracy wants to share with me, they have a program to process qualitative information. Your problem, they have like a SPSS from quantitative data, but for qualitative data that I think I can share with you. I don't know if you know about it. I think is KRMax. I don't know, Robert, do you know it? No?
No, sorry. SPSS no? I do know, but KRMax, no. I don't know.
So it's a program to deal with qualitative data. So it could be useful for you and for all of us, of course. I will share with you after the meeting, okay?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sounds great, Edith. Are there any other questions for Anne? I know I have a couple myself, but I'll just give the floor to our partner cities.
Yes, I want to ask Anna if the reports do are run by the intelligence team or are run by you? Who are doing the reports?
We had an external evaluator who has sort of done a first draft of the final evaluation report. So they drafted it. In terms of reports, the GLA intelligence team did the postcode analysis for us. And oh, I was going to show you a little map that they did. I don't know, I can't find it now. Which was really useful. And then the final reports are kind of managed. We worked through a grants management organisation called Groundwork. And so they were managed through Groundwork, who sort of can pull us off a spreadsheet of all the sort of responses.
Okay, and it's the information is on a spreadsheet, is it?
And we've got information across several different spreadsheets. So we've sort of got the application information and then the final report information. I need to find a way of sort of being able to merge the two a bit better.
Okay, thank you.
So if there aren't any other questions, I would like to ask you something, Anne. I was wondering, you were talking about face-to-face interviews, but also talking about Culture Seed community. And I was wondering what the differences were and what the different outputs were, because I face-to-face, I can imagine one person asking another person a question, and the community is more of a group conversation. But could you maybe elaborate a little bit more about the different questions you ask face-to-face versus the Culture Seed community, and what the difference in output were?
Yeah, so the face-to-face interviews were done by our external evaluator. And it's sort of a much more formal thing. So, you know, he'd email people, arrange a time to go and see them. And, you know, had some set questions that he would work through, but they were also a space where there could be a conversation. You know, it wasn't so formal that he couldn't move from that structure. And that has been mainly used to produce case studies that I hope we can find a way of doing a series of sort of creative Londoners case studies for the GLA's wider culture work. Whereas a Culture Seeds community you know, they were never pitched at people as, we are collecting data from you, this is an interview. They weren't compulsory. They were opportunities for people to share what they've been up to. And I think what we found through those events is actually organisations or people working at the really kind of grassroots community level really value the opportunity of being able to talk to someone at an organisation like the GLA about their projects. And, you know, we'd do them in the evenings at City Hall, and I was always being kicked out of security who were wanting to close the building because people just wanted to carry on talking. And so again, that's why I sort of say, with so much of the information and data that's qualitative is in my head, because it's from those conversations that there's sort of no way of writing it down unless I went straight home sort of at 11 o'clock at night and sort of did a download. But is incredibly useful when people say to me, oh, we'd like to recommend someone to be a network that is helping young people, or do you know anyone that's doing this in Lewisham? I'm like, oh yes, because I had that conversation with them. So yeah, it's sort of a less formal, but nevertheless incredibly useful information.
Yeah, I can imagine. Thank you. I was also wondering, a lot of different ways of collecting data, quantitative and qualitatively, and I was wondering, how do they, for example, do you use interesting answers out of the questionnaire to use in the face-to-face interviews, for example, or is it all set on forehand?
I mean, it's not sort of so formally set as all that. I think for our approach for Culture Seeds, it was very much that, you know, the GLA as a public body needs to have numbers to report against to be able to, you know, to explain what it's done. But I think those face-to-face interviews they colour in the numbers a bit. That numbers are very black and white, whereas it sort of brings it off the page, when you can hear about the impact it's had on a participant's life, is if if you balance it with big numbers, but then those personal stories, I think it has a bit more impact when you're sort of writing about a project or what a program did, that people can see themselves within it or can see a participant or the beneficiaries within it.
Yeah,
totally agree.
Yeah, I do too. Last question from my part. I was wondering, you were talking about a little bit of difficulty in evaluation and reporting due to language barriers. I was wondering, I can imagine that will also be the case in the face-to-face interviews, for example. How did you cope with that?
I think with the face-to-face interviews were mainly with the grant holders rather than with the participants. And actually, I think they helped get over some of those barriers. For instance, I think about, I've forgotten her name. It was a woman who's from sort of Gypsy Roma community, and she had terrible trouble, just filling out the application form. And so for her, a final report was also going to be a similar challenge. But we said, well, let's do a face-to-face interview and fill out the final report form as we're going through that. So it can sort of support her to give fuller answers into the final report and understand the numbers a little bit more.
Wow, impressive. So it's because you are also working within a system, but you're trying to be see every case as its own and see how you can help them. It's very inspiring, I think. Also, I loved I just wrote down that you said the importance between face-to-face between the grantee and the grant people who gives the grants. And I think that's really inspiring and very important. I think, I don't know, but if I hear you speaking, I think that's the success about Culture Seeds. The very short lines you have between people who want to apply for a grant and people who give the grant.
Yeah, and I think that's incredibly important as a grant maker. Partly with Culture Seeds, it's not a huge program, so that I'm still capable of having those personal relationships with the grant holders. If it was much bigger, that would be more of a challenge. But I always used to, when I went to visit projects, and there's always that awkward moment where someone thanks you for the funding. And you just think, well, no, thank you. We can't deliver we give out the money because we want certain outcomes. And you're doing that. So, doing that. It's, the balance of power is often quite uneven, isn't it, between grant maker and grantee? It shouldn't.
It is, yeah. Agree. We always say in Amsterdam, we're not at the head of the table anymore. We're part of the round table. Everybody is equal at the table. Because in the one of the first slides were the numbers, and I was very impressed by the how much people were applying. So because you can also imagine that the first round is very difficult to find people who would apply for a grant. And I think 6 million, you said? 6 million was applied, and you only had one.
Yeah. I think we ran Culture Seeds as a rolling program, so it was a 2-year program, but within that there were no deadlines. So people could apply when suited them. They could also reapply, if they hadn't. Often we would go back to people and say, we were really interested in this project, but we needed a bit more information on X, Y, or Z, and so they could come back in. So some of those sort of reapplications, but I think having that sort of 2-year run into it is we started off sort of looking at 15 applications per meeting, and by the end we were looking at about 100, which was a little bit unmanageable, but word certainly got out eventually.
Wow, impressive. Any other questions, because we have to let Anne go within a few minutes? Edith, are you raising your hand?
Yes, I am.
Go ahead.
about related numbers, so trying to transform the numbers into more human information. That is a little bit what you do. I want to hear what are the social impact indicators that you use to evaluate your program.
Oh, I should have checked.
Do you have already?
Yeah, so there were things like, I mean, and the questions were sort of split between the participant questionnaires and the final reports.
Okay.
So we worked with the GLA intelligence team who work with our social inclusion team to kind of try and find measures. Okay. So it was things like, you know, asking people how connected they felt to their community afterwards. But then also within the participant questionnaires, things like, did you meet anyone new at the event? Did you talk to someone you hadn't met before or something like that? That the intelligence team say, well, these are sort of indicators that people are, you know, if they're meeting new people at an event, this is a good indicator that there was a positive, you know, a positive interaction on kind of meeting different people.
Okay, okay. Okay, thank you very much. Can you share with us that set of indicators to measure social impact?
Yeah, do you know what? I think, let me check, but I think the social integration team have done a toolkit for measuring things like that.
Okay.
I'll see if that's available to share publicly. Yeah.
Okay. That would be very interesting. You can send it to me and then I will make sure everybody gets it. If there aren't any other burning questions, I'm going to thank Anne very much. Thank you so much. It was very inspirational, very inspiring. I love the way you work with different kind of data and also trying to make the load of questions towards the people who get the grants as minimum as possible. So very inspiring. Thank you so much for your time and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.
Applause.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, Anne. Bye.